Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen and do all that fun stuff that I usually do. Zoom recording. All right. So here's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be talking about models and validation. I'm just going to repeat because other people, while it's being recorded, so people can view what we talked about. Uh, Things are fast approaching. We had a sprint this week. We have a sprint next week. They are meant to be keeping yourself on track. They are not meant to be, you know, giving you a coronary or anything like that. We want you to, I think there's a submission as well for this sprint, but the idea is like, this is where my project is so that you don't let it slide. If you give me the project at the very last day of class, but nothing in the sprints, you would lose points. But if you're behind on one part of the sprint, that's okay. Just you want to catch up on a lot of these things. And the only way for software development, one of the only surefire ways that we know to keep programmers on task, and unfortunately, is this sort of agile short iteration development cycle. It doesn't always work. It is not the be all and end all. It's not a silver bullet, but it does keep people working at a reasonable and consistent pace because they have shorter term goals versus sometimes you'll spin your wheels and do 3 weeks on a single project and not have anything to show for it. Like in industry, I've done that. 3 weeks, nothing to show for it, just programming away consistently 8 hours a day and nothing. So that's why we have these little sprints. They're meant to simulate what a real sprint would look like, but also it's to motivate you guys or to keep you on task. And then on April the 8th, we are going to have in the lab time, you're going to post your project so other people can review it. So it needs to be globally visible. You're going to post your project on CLearn in the message boards. I'm hoping that works well for us. We don't have Piazza like I used to use. And other people will review your system, give you feedback, what worked well, what worked poorly, what was confusing. You're giving them a task. We'll go over this in a second, but it's asynchronous, but the lab time is reserved for that. So if you say, I don't have time to do that, I'm going to call BS on you. Why? Because there's 2 hours after this lecture. You have 2 hours in order to do a lab. Those 2 hours can be spent or should be spent reviewing the other projects and writing it up. That's the plan. So if you don't use that 2 hour period, you're doing something else during that 2 hour period, and then you say, I ran out of time, too bad, right? It's reserved for that. Um, just me being overly defensive because I just finished 2 exams in my other courses, and they're all telling me uh, that they didn't have time, and then I'm questioning it for some students. Okay, I'm a little bitter. Okay, let's go over what we're talking about today. We're talking about models, so not supermodels, not anything else, not model airplanes, but conceptual models or models for how we evaluate our systems. So we talked very, very briefly about something like software architectural models. This is how the code looks. It's very much what the software engineers are thinking about. If you're programming up one of these systems, you have to think about this. It has nothing to do with what the user is doing or anything like that. This is what the code looks like. That's probably not what you guys are going to be worrying about most of the time, but it is what a software engineer will be hitting. They will throw these things at you if they want to show you what the plan of things is, right? Because they're going to be staring at code and they think that's the be all and end all. That's fine. It's absolutely necessary for a software project, but that's from a computer centric thing. That's how the code looks, not how people do things. You can look at it from the design decisions. This is actually how we've been sort of framing everything, where we figure out what the domain is, what people are like, what the domain of use is. Then we figure out what their task is. And based on their task, then we figure out what the visualization or interaction idioms are. And only then. So we're doodling stuff on paper first, right? We have our designs, everything's polished, everything's sort of planned out. Still, things might change, but we're planned out everything we're going to do. And then and only then do we get to step 4, which is the algorithm, where and that algorithm, this is from a researcher's standpoint, but the actual coding happens after you've figured out the visualization, the visual encoding approach that you're going to take. After you figure all this other stuff, step 4, the actual coding, this UML diagram, all the what you guys might consider the hard part of the task. I think it's the easier part of the task comparatively. The hard part of the task is step 4. And that's why we're emphasizing it. That's why I'm like, yeah, if you want to use Tableau, that's fine. Because it's not the main task. Everyone keeps on thinking this is a programming class. No, it's a part. It's not the be all and end all. Okay. And then there's another thing where you look at the process, how you go about it. It's very, very similar. One is how you make your design decisions. So how you design for each phase. The other is figuring out who does what are you going to do. The planning stages, if you will. That's another way of looking at it, another model of interaction. We're going to look at that, I think now, maybe in a second. Yeah, we're going to look at it now. So this is not necessarily the only way of doing things, but this is a perfectly valid way of doing this. This is a 9-step process, for example, where you figure out as a precondition, you figure out what people are doing, who's involved, all that kind of stuff. It's just planning. It's preparation. It's preparing your kitchen before you start cooking. Right? Here's us cooking, right? Is we're discovering what we need to do, we're designing things, we're implementing it, we're deploying it. That's our system, the actual stuff we're building, what people would say you normally do for your job. This stuff over here, equally important, but everyone sort of ignores it. It's a thing I ignore, unfortunately. So things to be on the lookout for. And then finally, this stuff you're not going to do at all, but maybe it's for actual software, or unless you're doing research later on with this. This is stuff like writing up your reports, writing up a reflection, postmortems on your system. If you're talking industry, it might be maintenance of code. It might be um, future versions of your code, things like that. The interesting thing about the system, hopefully this will make a bit more sense. We have precondition, so we do literature review, we see what other people are doing. This is figuring out our competitive advantage if you want to look at business parlays. What are we trying to convey? What's the data that we're looking at? What's that sort of thing? Or what has been done before? We want to look at, so winnowing is to figure out the data, strip it down, make it smaller, figure out who, what's engaging, what's intellectual. We're trying to figure out what we're looking at. That was task 1 at the beginning of the course. And then you figure out what your roles are. Again, task 1, each of you have a role in your team. Then we characterize and abstract the problem. We design or narrow it down. So we have a broad problem, then we narrow it down to something very specific. We then implement it with a whole bunch of rapid prototypes, and then we deploy and validate. Okay. And then afterwards we have this analysis on reflecting what's the value of the work, what do people learn from it, what's the adoption rate, that sort of thing. All of this is really, I'll look at some of the issues with this, but I want to point out this whether I saw this, I removed all the other text associated with it last night, but I still love the diagram. I love this particular diagram for one very, very simple reason. And that is it's sort of painfully blunt about what's going on here. Make sure we're doing okay. Okay. We got a bunch of data. If we do not have enough data, if it's all in your head, so if all the information that you have about the system is in your head, like when someone says, oh, I have a great idea for, a video game, and they say, it's sort of a thing with a thing. Yeah, I've gotten that enough times, where it's not written down, nothing's laid out, nothing's planned. It's all sort of floating around their head, nothing concrete. Can't do it. Can't do squat with it, right? I cannot make a visualization if I don't know what the data looks like. It's just sort of internalized in your head, like how you think genres of music should work. It's sort of floating around in your head, but you can't really articulate, you can't lay it down, you can't clearly, if you can clearly articulate it and put it and encode it, put it in a computer, great. If you can't, you're in this stage. You can't make a visualization off of something with a sort of with a thing. Yeah, that thing. If it can all go in the computer though, so you can encode everything and you have a nice crisp task. So it's not fuzzy at all. It's a nice crisp task that you can clearly define what you're doing. There's no point doing a visualization either. If you're trying to get the mean of a bunch of numbers, you do not need a visualization. You just need to crunch some numbers. If you can exactly articulate things and there's no like, I need a machine learning algorithm, or like, what's the frequency of this word? Count them. You don't need, you can algorithmically solve the problem. There's no design and all. There's no visualization involved. So this is the reason I want to point this out is there are problems that people want to make a visualization for, but if it's too easy to do and it's easily identifiable, which is what I've been trying to push your projects away from at the beginning of term. Oftentimes people will give me these very specific things. I want to see all the parks in Ottawa. Already done. Try something else. Right? It doesn't give me something. It's clearly defined. It's already done. The data is already there. What the hell's the point of? I mean, you might want the visualization for people to understand it, but if you're trying to see how long it takes to get a COVID vaccine, it's a number. Tell them the number. Don't tell them a visualization, a bunch of other things. If it's really crisp, you can give a number for it. Give them the darn number. Right? You don't need a visualization. Okay, that's that diagram here. I like to point out this one. So there's a bunch of animated transitions. I'm not going to even try to fight it. Right? So here we go. In all of our cases, number one rule, it's the problem I always have, is premature advancement to another stage. So jumping to the next stage before you're ready. It is a danger always with a course like this, but it's a real danger in industry where there's real costs. So if I'm designing and I just start coding without fully thinking through my design, which is what I was trying to avoid with P4. If you just go, it'll get to it with coding. It is a kiss of death. It's what bites you it bites you every time. So premature advancement is a common thing for all of these stages. But if you don't know enough about the visualization literature, you're in this stage. I'm going to try and go faster on most of these. I like pointing out this particular story. A friend of mine from graduate school was just about to finish his PhD and then found a research paper in his topic from about 20 years ago that sort of undercut everything about his doctoral work. Like in the last 6 months before of a 5-year program, in the last 6 months, he finds this research project that somebody else has done. I still wake up sort of in sweats because I know my literature review was not sufficient because I now know the proper terms that I was supposed to be using when it looks at behavioral economics for my PhD. My PhD looked at visualizations in casual contexts, and I was looking at motivation, why people are motivated to do things. And I should have been doing a much deeper dive in behavioral economics, why people do certain things. That's well studied, but I didn't know the right terms, the right terminology. I didn't know the right research areas. I was looking more in the psych literature. So I'm terrified. My entire dissertation is insufficient now because of that. Right? I didn't have I did a premature literature review. Okay. So winnowing. One of the big things we have is we know you don't have data. You don't have any rapport with your collaborators. We don't have real important recurring tasks. If you have a task that you're looking for, if you have a task or data looking for a problem, you're in this stage, this error. You didn't winnow correctly. You didn't reduce what you're looking for correctly. If you're looking for something that's already done, why are you doing it? Or if it's too big, why are you doing it? Right? If you don't have any potential collaborators, if you don't have a data set that works, that's the errors in this range. Who's doing what? This is a problem that you guys didn't hit, but it's a big problem. The data dudes hit this problem with me, right? You're trying to get a real end user, and it's me. I'm not a real investor, so I don't have the right answers. I'm trying my best, but in the real world, you better get a real user in there, and not you think of the key stakeholder, and it might be the wrong stakeholder. And a lot of times my problem is that people will make you a tool builder. They will say, I want this. And the people that you're working with in industry think you're building something for them, not because you're researching, or in this case for researching, but oftentimes people want these custom solutions for them. They will want parks for Bob, right? um, and so that's what you got to avoid as well. Ignoring practices that currently work, not understanding the task right. That's in the discovery phase. That's task 2 that we had. That's also going to kill you, right? If you got the task wrong, if you do not know why people do what they do and they have a very good reason almost invariably, you're going to get it wrong. Uh, Here's our design. We're abstracting too little. We're premature commitment to a particular design. We're not ready to throw away our designs. That's why we had so many designs and we threw so many of them away. The idea is you spray the area with different designs and then clip it down to the best designs you can come up with. And here we go. That's implementation. Two errors. And that's, you might say, well, those just the errors. All the time commitment to the implementation is a lot more. No, the implementation, it is a lot of work in terms of implementing things, but it is a smaller part of this ecosystem than you might think. The actual coding is not what most visualization developers panic over. All the other stuff dictates what this thing is, how I implement it. And then deployment, how you release it out to the wild. And we're not going to worry about the reflection and stuff like that because, well, you're not doing a research paper necessarily, but how you tell your story at the end, what your final project is. If you just jump to it, you don't think about your results, and you write your P9 paper without thinking about your results. That's going to be a problem for your project. You need to know, you have to thought it through, why your project worked, why it didn't work. That kind of reflection is critically important. And if you don't do it, I'm going to notice for your P9. Okay. So we're going to talk about how you evaluate these kinds of systems. And it's a lot more convoluted than you might think. So we've talked about threats to validity in other places, right? Or if you have the wrong abstraction, that sort of thing. One of the things your job is while you're making your design, you justify your designs. That's what we were talking about last time. That's why P3 and P4, I kept on, yelling at you guys for your P3 and your P4. I was very mean. I wasn't trying not to be mean, but I was fairly mean about this because at every single step, if you design something, you better be able to justify why that line is there, why you use that color, and have theory to back it up. That's what we're trying to get you to practice. That's what the expectation is. It's not guesswork. There's theory to back up all of this stuff. You're supposed to be using it. But besides all of this is where we're looking at right now, right? I've made this system. How do I test that it actually works? I put all this time into, programming this thing up, which is what your sprints are. I spent all this time designing it, P3 and P4. P2 was our task analysis. P1 is, figuring out the domain. How do you know you did it right? This is how you know you did it right. Ultimately, the proof is in the pudding. Ultimately, the test at the end is justifying that you did the right approach. Okay, so what can we do? Well, if you look at functionality, right, there's a bunch of different criteria we can look at. Some of them are sort of the default standard. Functionality, this would be very lowbrow, but does it do what you want it to? Does the car actually drive? If it's a hybrid, does it go a certain, does it reduce your fuel consumption? That's the functionality thing. Does it have, does my system allow me to find a nearby park that I can go skating in? If it doesn't, you did it wrong, right? That's what functionality is sort of like. It doesn't say how good it does it. Can it do that task? We're going to be looking at that with our task analysis, looking at when we do usability tests. Effectiveness. So does the visualize provide value? Is it better than just using a Google map to find a park? You can do the same task multiple ways. It has functionality. That functionality might be equivalent to a Google map. Is it more effective than using a Google map, I can't pronounce the word Google today, is it more effective than using a Google map to find a park, or to use a Google map to find the nearest COVID testing, or just do a search for COVID testing? Is that more efficient than using your system, right? Am I just, is it as effective as just randomly guessing what to invest in? Or does anyone actually use this for finding out red light cameras doesn't work as well for this. Efficiency, how fast do you find things? How fast do you find that my route is going to be slowed down today because of construction or because of crosswalks at the time? Finding an alternate route. That's efficiency. That's very important, but you're not going to have efficiency is not the important thing for something like the data dudes group. When you're looking for where to invest, you're willing to put in time. You want it to be efficient, but that's not the be all and end all. You want to get some insight from it, but it's not about speed. The working women on the go, though, it has to be fast. Same with COVID testing. People are not going to spend time just floating around trying to explore stuff. They might for the red light camera group. They might for the data dudes group looking at investment pieces. But a lot of your projects are, this has to be fast. It has to be effective at getting the information across. Same with parks. How usable is it? So when you use this, by the way, the term user friendly, this is going to be very, I've been harping on this for a while. My wife's sick of it too. It's going to be very similar to pie charts and rainbow color maps. User friendly should mean something. It really doesn't. And so when people throw around the word user friendly, it's the normal dead giveaway that they're just putting in fluff words that mean nothing. It actually has no real official definition, and it was so overused in the 80s that, yeah, don't use it. Say usable, that's fine. That means something very specific. How easy is for the user to interact with the system? Is it clear? Is it understandable? Is it intuitive how I use something? If I use a system, do I need step-by-step instructions, or can I just use it? So I'm looking at the pension plan for Carlton. I think I mentioned this on Tuesday, but looking at the pension plan for Carlton, they're saying it's user friendly. Is it usable? Oh, hell no, it's not usable. My job is to go to this thing, figure out what my pension is, figure out how I'm doing, figure out if I should increase my pension amounts. They're presenting information in in a non-intuitive way, and I have to read their instruction. I have to read like an 8-page document to figure out how to use their system. No, not usable at all. Terrible. In fact, that's usability. It has functionality. I can do what I needed to do. I do not have usability. I do not have efficiency either because I have to read all the documentation. Is it effective? Not particularly. I could probably do it. I think it's the only way to do it. So I don't have the effectiveness comparison. And is it useful? It can be effective and usable all you want. Does it provide any utility? That's one of my big ones. Can I do something with this? If you give me COVID testing information, where the COVID testing places are, it's not useful if I have to go to one place and only one place. There's no utility or usefulness to this system in that case. Something to consider. Okay, so besides those things, let's look at how we can evaluate our systems. We'll take a brief break in a second, but we have quantitative studies. That's normally we have a hypothesis, we test it. Sort of the standard scientific method. What I was born in, what I was raised on. This is the gold standard for me, even though I have to fight that my natural instinct is to think of this as the gold standard, and it's not. It's not the only way, it's not the only game in town. But we have some kind of analysis, we have a hypothesis, what we'd expect to see happen compared to a control condition, and we do some direct measures. So especially controlled experiments or experimental studies where we have an evaluator, we manipulate a particular factor. So I have this system, we have them, you do that task twice, once with this system, once with this other system. Are you better at it? Do you get better insights? Do you get more, do the insights or the conclusions you make from that visualization, are they better than the measurements on using another system? and some kind of performance metric, what we covered in the previous slide. Qualitative studies, though, are what I did for my PhD, because sometimes you can't measure it or you can't just control everything. So a qualitative study might be a questionnaire, might be an interview, might be observational. I had people go about their daily lives. Normally, we want to see where people were using visualizations in their daily lives and like visual representations of data in their daily lives, where they saw them, how long they were using them, and what was going on, what was the circumstance around it. I can't do a controlled study in that case. I have to just let people go off in their normal lives and then see what they come up with and see if I can find patterns in that. So this was an artifact study that I did. Or you can have a focus group. That we're going to do this with what is it called? Student co-creators, I think is whatever the term is at Carleton. So I had a TA last term to help me try and refine Bit 2400. Former Bit 2400 student helping me come up with like how the student's thinking, what's the problems are, right? Or focus group. I get a bunch. So I'm actually doing a focus group for that. All of a bunch of professors all talking to each other, and they're taking notes of what we come up with. Okay, it's very fuzzy, but it gives you some insight that you can't get within an experiment. You can do also interviews and case studies as well. You can do some questionnaires, but they're going to give you quantitative data. You're asking specific questions on oftentimes in interviews. It might be like what you did with T2. You did an interview trying to get my insights on the particular topic or particular task. That's a kind of qualitative data. And speaking of which, you guys are the first people I've talked about this to. March 31st to April 14th, you will be getting an individual email. This is for the new online student experience questionnaire, better known as student evaluations. They're trying it again this year. It's brand new system, brand new numbers. I'm hoping it's better than the biased. The old questionnaire was really bad. It was like, is he on time? Is that his effect? And is he is he or she a good instructor? And you're like, those are weighted equally, whether I'm prompt or whether I'm a good instructor. That's insane. It's an online questionnaire, and they're going to be passing this out to you guys. The reason I'm bringing this up, I'm strongly recommending you to fill those out. Your feedback always hurts when you read it, but at the same time, I'd rather have everyone's feedback than just the angry or just the happy people. I want everyone's feedback. The more diverse, the more, if I get the entire population, right, I have an accurate representation of how the class felt. If I have a disproportionate, or if I have a non-representative sample, yes, I'm using all these stats terms. If I have only the angry people in the class fill in this questionnaire, I'm going to get a whole lot of angry messages or angry comments, and everyone's going to think, well, I'm not going to know what you actually felt like. If I only get happy and angry people, I don't have the full picture. Ideally, we want the entire population. We want everybody in this class filling in the questionnaire. That's how we know we get the more complete picture of what, how I'm doing in the class, how the class can be improved. This is directly pulled into how we refine the class in future iterations. For example, my plan right now is to change this big project and not make it quite as um, not let people choose their own data set, but everyone sort of gets a data set, the same data set, and we walk through it and we more directly apply it to the course content that when we do, no link diagrams and graphs, you make a graph for your project to see how that works, right? Make it more directly applied and a lot less open, right? But maybe you don't want that. That's what this is for, to find out what your feedback is. So please, when you get the email, please take the time. I actually read every single piece of feedback people give me. Even whenever you'll see me in a funk if I have a bad review. Right? It's important. So please, everybody, whether you like the course, you didn't like the course, or indifferent about the course, please fill in the feedback. It does actually make a difference. All right. With me so far, I hope. There's nothing in the chat, so it's like me talking into a void here. I want to point out something here. This is what we're going to do. This is our wheelhouse for this term. We cannot do the full-blown. I used to have for my HCI class, they do a proper user evaluation. They do a proper lit review and a proper user evaluation in there. And it's very stressful. Everyone has a different approach to how you design a system. We're only doing usability tests. It's the low bar, the lowest bar we have for how well a system was working. So I want to make sure that we're feeling good about this. So here is what P7 is. I got to double check my numbering system, but I think it's P7. What we're going to do on April 8th is, I got to fix this one. Let me fix it right now. Instead of 12, it's going to be 8 and 5 by 7. 2. I've got to move this around. I just want to make sure you see the right thing. As of this morning, just because I am getting a little concerned about the amount of time I'm taking up, I'm trying to make it a little bit easier if we can. The plan of attack is for each of you to evaluate 2 other systems. There's a lot of you in this class, so we don't need a crazy number of reviewers per system. If you evaluate, each person evaluates 2 systems, and I'm guessing about 28 people in the class. It might be more, it might be less than that. I think it's a bit less than that. That means that I have 4 people per system. If we have 28 people and we divide it by 7 projects. We have 7 projects, right? I'm pretty positive we have 7 projects. So if we have 28 people in the class, 7 projects, that's 4 per project. That can that means each project should get 4 reviews, and we have 2 people. We review 2 systems. That means you should get 8 reviews for your system for each one of these projects. So your system should get 8 different reviews. We don't want just one, because you should compare this to another group. Or so for you as the individual evaluator, you get to see 2 systems. For the individual projects, you get more diverse opinions on things. Hopefully it's going to help. So your job, each of your groups are going to be posting information about your system, maybe a video if it helps. But it's not the full be all and end all. Your system doesn't have to be perfect. It has to support the tasks you said it needs to support. That's the big one. So it does not need a login screen. It does not need instructions on how to do things. It doesn't need to support pathfinding or any of these other crazy features you might have wanted to put in there. It has to support your primary tasks. You state what your tasks are. You give them a task to do which reflects that primary task, like trying to pick on somebody, the red light camera. Tell us the number of how the red light camera seems to have affected traffic in Alta Vista, as an example. I want to see if I can come up with one of the other systems, but that's the kind of thing. Find a restaurant find a festival that you think is going to be interesting in downtown, interesting to go to in July in downtown Ottawa. There you go. That's another task that you might want to do. Or what would be an interesting festival there? You want to give them specific tasks that your system is supposed to support, and then the people evaluating system really only can evaluate you based on those tasks. They can keep on exploring the system, but they cannot hold you accountable for tasks that you didn't say you were supporting. So if you say it would have been nice to be able to do pathfinding, but we don't have that in there, they can't say, oh, you should have supported pathfinding. No, that's not the task. So you will provide a bunch of tasks for them to do, specific tasks for them to do. They will evaluate based on those tasks. They will say what they liked, what they didn't like, what could be improved, what their user interface looks like. Is your icon design good, or do they like your icon design? That sort of thing. Hopefully that makes some sense. Can I answer any questions about what we're doing? So you have about 4 days, only 4 days, so you post this. We're setting aside lab time to run those evaluations. You don't have to do it in the lab time, but if you don't do it in the lab time and you say, I didn't have time, you had the lab time. That's reserved on your schedule. So 4 days to do the evaluations, to do 2 of these evaluations, take some screenshots for things that you find confusing, or if there's a big bug, take a screenshot, pass that as part of your evaluation. I'm all for, if you want, make a PDF, just throw the PDF as posts, or insert the PDF into your post. So 2 people per group. I'm not assigning you to particular groups. It's sort of on a based on the dibs system. So you find 2 projects that you want to evaluate, put your dibs on them, say I'll do this one, I'll do this one, and then later on make a post that give you all the details. After that, each of these for each of your projects, you'll read their feedback, figure out what kind of modifications, what kind of changes you would want to make in your system based on their feedback, prioritize it, give a review of the reviewers, predominantly for, were they just mean jerks? If they're mean jerks, tell us they were mean jerks. You have the ability to critique your critiquers, right? Hopefully you'll all be very nice to each other, but don't be too nice, because if you're too nice and the system randomly crashes and you don't say anything about it, and I figure out that the system randomly crashes, you didn't review it thoroughly enough. Right? You want them to be the individual reviewers should be, you should be thorough enough for that. That's the kind of thoroughness that you would have wanted, right? If you were making a real system, the reviewers should be reviewing it about that level, and not more than that. So don't be harsh or mean or about things. That's where we're aiming, right? Do you legitimately and honestly evaluate the system in a fair way? And if so, that should give you a great mark. And are you clear about your feedback? That's what P7 is all about. No one has made any comments whatsoever. I would like to take a little pause here. Can I answer any questions about what we're doing with P7? I'm wondering how many people are. I've been hearing horror stories about Zoom meetings. Sorry, but so it's maybe a bit of paranoia. One of my TAs, Janae, which you may have had as a TA, I'm not sure. But Janae was like, "Yeah, I have some students telling me that they're playing. They have Zoom on. They have the Zoom meeting on. They're not listening at all. They're doing something else. They're washing dishes. They're doing all these other things, and then they're hoping that magically by osmosis this thing sticks in their head." And these horror stories. So I'm hoping you're paying attention. And if you're not, please pay attention. Maybe I should have said that earlier in the term. Um, Perfect. All right. Yeah, we were hearing some horror stories. My personal favorite was people in 1400, I think, last term were saying, "Oh my God, the course is going way too fast. Oh my gosh, the material is too fast." And Janae's talking to them, and he goes, "Okay, so how are you watching the videos?" "Well, I don't watch the videos. I just listen to them, and I put it at twice speed." What? Stop that. Right. Or I didn't watch the videos at all, but I started the assignment and I couldn't figure it out. Yeah. It, it I, I, you just have to laugh at some point in time. Okay. Um, so let me move on one more slide. Actually, maybe I can actually show you. No, I won't show you the little comic strip one of my TAs sent me, but I had a good laugh at it. Uh, or maybe I'll send it around later on. Just some of the frustrations you get by teaching into this void Zoom void here. We're going to talk about 7 scenarios on how you can evaluate your system. We've already talked about the kinds of metrics you have, like functionality. Are you looking for functionality, usability? Are you using utility? Are you looking at, so functionality would be, what can you do? Efficiency, how quick you are at using your system. Here are some ways that you can evaluate your data. So how do you understand your data in the end? Well, one of the things you could be testing is for understanding their environments and practices. This is something you're not necessarily doing for this project. You definitely wouldn't be doing for this project. It's critically important in other cases. Tracking air traffic controllers, that's the first thing you do, right? You need to understand what their use cases are, what their practices are. There are research papers on just this, nothing to do with visualization. They're in the visualization community, but they're papers on just how they studied what people are actually doing there. One of my personal favorites. So this is Heidi Lam. Okay. Heidi Lam is a fellow UBC grad, now working, I think, at Tableau Research, I do believe, but she was at Google for a long, long, long time. One of these kinds of projects would be, let me think of the best example of it, tabletop displays. Not visualization, but tabletop displays. They were coming out, no one knew what to do with them. So people were making these big, gigantic tables that were computer displays. You don't see those anymore, but that was a big project concept. And, they're building these things, but they're essentially windows, a Windows display just plopped down flat. And the research paper was, well, how do people actually work around a table? And people went, well, obviously they know how to work around a table. And you go, are you sure it's obvious? And sure enough, if you give them like a puzzle or you give them a task to do over top of a real world table, like a kitchen table, they do things differently than what they expected. And if you're sharing and working together, you need to know how people organize their information on a table, like doing a puzzle. And it turns out you make these little personal space pockets around you. You have a side thing where you're the work in progress, but you're not directly working on it, just put to the side. And then communal pieces of a puzzle or whatever task you're doing go in the center for everyone to be able to grab. And if you don't know people are doing that, you're designing your tabletop display wrong. Okay, understanding what the visual analysis task is, figuring out what the task analysis, what are they trying to do? Another big part, something we're studying. How you can communicate through the visualization. In this case, the red light camera might be one of those. If you're trying to convince people that red light cameras are crappy, you have to try and convince them. You're using the visualization to try and persuade them about what your view on this thing is, well, especially if you have the data to back it up. Can you communicate that? That's one of those kinds of systems. So how you evaluate how you do collaborative data analysis. I don't think anyone has collaborative analysis here, but you could. So multiple people all using their phone to figure out what kind of festival they want to go to in Ottawa would have been a collaborative data analysis task. We don't have that particular thing, but that's what it could be. Let me think of. I'm sorry if there's probably a project group that I'm blanking on right now for. Who do we have? I'm just trying to think if I'm missing any particular project groups, and I apologize if I am. We cover those. Working Women on the Go wouldn't be necessarily one of those. No, I don't think I've missed anybody right so far right now. So how you communicate through the visualization, how you do your data analysis, what kind of things you can read from the data itself. How do you understand, you can look at user performance. How fast are you at doing this? What kind of insights do you have? What kind of measurements do you have? You evaluate some kind of performance. So do you have a better quality of the kinds of investments you would be making? Do you know what the fastest path from point A to point B is during rush hour traffic? All of those would be user performance. Figure out the user's experience, right? What did you like? What did you not like? That tends to be more qualitative, different dimension altogether, right? But more qualitative, what people like, what they didn't like, where they got confused. And then you can also look at the algorithm. So the user experience could be everything from what they got confused by, what they liked about it, what they didn't like. It can be very fuzzy in nature. And they can even evaluate the algorithm itself. Is it faster? We'll look at each one of those things one at a time, but hopefully very, very quickly. I'm going to be skipping through a lot of slides. It's just arrow, just in advance, because I don't want to be spending, 50 minutes talking about it. But I like to point out that where these things come in. Okay. So field observations, interviews with people. That's where you understand the work practices. Case studies, controlled experiments. That's where you figure out how people can use this for data analysis and reasoning. Like, what insights do you get? So yes, evaluating the data analysis and reasoning, not the same as the user experience or how fast you are doing it. Oftentimes, if you need a controlled experiment, this doesn't work great for controlled experiments because you need multiple people, but field studies, passing off a system to people and seeing how they actually use it. Oh, sorry, that's the collaborative data analysis. Evaluating, communicating through the visualization would be, do they get the insights that you expected them to get? If you see Napoleon's March, do you conclude what you expect the person to conclude? Is it, if you're communicating, especially for storytelling, is it telling the story the way you expect it to? Is it communicate? So I have this plan. This is what I expect them to get. This is what they see. I did not make that communication properly. Control experiments, log analysis. I love log analysis experiments. If you want to see users' performance, you could see how long they're using the system, how quickly they abandon the system, or how long it takes them to do a particular task. The user experience would be more abandonment. Okay? If they use the system once and never touch it again, maybe their user experience wasn't very good. It's evidence that their user experience wasn't very good. It might be evidence that they only need to use it once, but you need to know, is this a one-time system or not? Part of their task. And then you can just do measurements, performance analysis. You can just do clock testing on algorithmic experiments. You guys aren't doing this one. This is in my domain, if you will. If I make a system that is laying out a no-link diagram and I'm saying it's more efficient than the other systems, I need to be able to back that up with some numbers. Okay, so here are, I'm hoping, I thought I had a, okay. So here are my general rules if you want a quick lowdown of general rules, because people don't pay attention to these rules, but I think they're important. This is sort of Sprague's rules of evaluation, how to do evaluations, or the general themes. Users don't state their problems. They show it, but they will not be able to tell you why they don't like something or what they don't like. They sort of, you'll see it though, and they won't explicitly tell you, I hate this. Some people will tell you things right to your face because they're rude and crude and, uncouth. Fine. But most people won't tell you. How many people will say, by the way, the thing you built, you spent your last 5 years building, yeah, it's a piece of garbage. They're not going to tell you that. They'll show it to you. You have to be on the lookout for those signs. Control and realism are mutually exclusive. So everyone wants a controlled experiment, but it will not tell you how it works in the real world. So if you are looking at cultural events in downtown Ottawa, you bring them into a controlled lab study. You show them your system versus using Google Maps and Google search, comparing the two. You will get some kind of result. That does not mean it's actually usable. That does not mean it's going to be used in the real world. It means it works in that experimental setting. And if you want to see an example of this, try using Google Maps. Like you use Google Maps to find a pathway in the real, find how to get from this building to this building. Do it in a controlled study. Now do it while walking around town. There's no control in that case. But if you're driving a car or you're walking, looking at your phone, it's a very different experience, because now suddenly I'm tripping on things, I'm tripping over roots, I'm walking into people. There's a whole lot of other distractions, and that's completely not that's not accounted for at all in a controlled study. Holistic and precise are mutually exclusive, as in, if I want the whole picture, I can't get precision. They are different. Qualitative gives me holistic. Qualitative, as in, I talk to people and interview them and figure out how they like a system. That gives me the big picture. It gives me a fuzzy big picture, but it gives me a big picture. If I want to get the exact time it takes you to do a task, that's very different. And I can't really get both. If I'm finding out how you like the system. I need to do a whole completely different analysis to figure out how efficient you are with the system. You can't get those precise numbers if you're doing an interview. You'll say, how long did it take you? And they will make up some number because, oh, users don't state their problem. They will not say this is inefficient, or they will not know if it's inefficient or not. They might think it's inefficient, but they won't be able to tell you the hard numbers. Okay, so you get one or the other. You can't get both. There is no, I should have it in here, but oh, that's the last one. Your evaluation isn't perfect. Don't pretend it is. There is no perfect evaluation. There is no single experiment you will ever see that is 100% perfect. There's always something that's missing. There's always something that you may have to do another experiment for. Even the most critically acclaimed experiments of all time are only one part of the bigger picture. You need further experimentation. Don't expect it to be perfect. There's always sources of errors. You just need to, you know, address your sources of errors. When you do a user evaluation, or if you're testing your system, if you say my system is perfect, I will laugh in your face. I won't actually, because I'm not going to be in your face. One, two, that's mean. Okay. But it's never perfect. Don't try and pretend it is. That's okay. Okay. Uh, if you ask, this is my personal favorite, just because it is, I see it every term when I used to do usability testing. One of the questions in the questionnaire would be, do you like our system? Or how much do you like our system? And the answer is always, it's fantastic. If the user doesn't say your system is fantastic, if they know it's your system and they don't say it's fantastic, you did something horribly wrong. Like you killed their parents or something with the system. That's how bad it must be. Like they must have gotten some kind of permanent injury from using your system if they don't say it's fantastic. Because everyone, do you like it? Yes, I do. Doesn't matter. I've seen some garbage systems and the people, yeah, it's a wonderful system. Honest. I've made some garbage systems and they said, oh, it's a wonderful system. Honest. You ask them what they like, they say they like your system. It's weird. And users lie. See the above comment, right? They may not lie maliciously. So one of the things, parts of this is if they lie, maybe you measure something else. Maybe you measure where their eye gaze is because they say, I saw this. They may think that they saw that. Their eye gaze, their eye tracking might say something else. Their speed in which they use the system might say something else. So you want to have measurements that are not relying on their intuition or their insight or their comments. Sometimes you might want those, but you also sometimes want hard numbers as well to see if they're lying, or at least not seeing the world as it is, right? Uh, if anyone has ever done a single stats course, uh, I'm hoping this rings true. By the way, this is not equals. If for those of you that forgot 1400, correlation does not equal causation. If you give me a correlation in something, if you say they use this, so they used our system, they were more efficient. If you conclude, or they used our system and it had this particular feature, therefore that feature is improving, it causes them to be more efficient. Absolutely not. You cannot conclude due to a correlation. So I'm trying to think of there's a whole spurious correlations, specious reasoning. There's a great bunch you can look on online, things like the flying spaghetti monster, or fearless correlations, I think is the name of the website, but things like pirates prevent global warming. That's one of my personal favorite examples, but it's a lot more subtle than that normally. Pirates do cause global warming, or pirates prevent global warming. Sorry. The advent of piracy was much higher in the past, and as soon as piracy starts dropping down in the world, suddenly global warming happens, and like a lot more carbon dioxide goes into the air. Therefore, by that correlation, pirates reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's just science, right? So we need to make more pirates because they, much like a plant, much like a tree, pirates soak up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The only explanation. Right? If you see a correlation, you cannot conclude anything about it. You can say that there is a correlation. You can say there might be a causation, but you certainly cannot say there is a causation because there is a correlation. One of the weird things, so conclusions about gun control laws causing, not gun control laws, tougher sentencing causing less criminal activity, when they actually have better correlations or better associations with reduction in lead amounts from unleaded switching to unleaded gasoline, or the legalization of abortion in the United States. There are better correlations for what you're actually seeing, but you still can't make a conclusion based on that. You just have a correlation. Okay. Uh, and of course, your evaluation isn't perfect. Don't try. Don't try to try to make a good evaluation, but don't try to pretend it's perfect. I will see through it. I love it. Love it when people can figure out the problems in their own evaluations. If your user evaluation looks at these 3 tasks and people say, have, if somebody has any trouble whatsoever, if you can point out where the problems are in your evaluation, I'm much happier than if you say my evaluations were perfect. I will see the faults in your evaluation. Don't you worry. So if you can see the faults in your evaluation, it means you're learning, and that counts for a lot more than it's perfect. Not pretend it's perfect. They will not. I will not believe you. I can believe you if it might do its job, but be upfront about where the limitations are. There are limitations. That's fine. It's okay. This is an initial attempt. Okay. The experience normally, you don't have this problem this term because it's online. Normally, I have to always warn people about this, but I like warning about them anyways. When you're doing user evaluation, people will do the dumbest things imaginable. You will tell them, do this, do this, do this. Look for this activity in Ottawa at this time of that this month. They will not read it, and they will look for some random other activity that's not supported by your system. They will then crap on your system for not supporting that random activity that they looked up because they didn't read your instructions. And you will facepalm like Jean-Luc Picard here because it's what people do. I will write instructions for all of my projects, and people will ask me, well, why doesn't it work? And you're like, it does. You didn't read the instructions. It's par for the course. So be prepared. It's okay. Just take a deep breath when people screw things up. That's fine. Okay. Um, so we're going to take a little mini break here. That's what I wanted to hit today. I would like you to see, let's see if we can get breakout rooms here. I'm going to stop sharing my, I probably shouldn't stop sharing my screen, but I'm going to do a bunch of breakout rooms. Hopefully I can do that now. And what I would like you to do is get together in your groups. It'll be self breakout room. So go into the breakout room where all the other people that you know are. And if you need help, just post something on the chat and I'll send you that way. For about 10 minutes, think about, I would like you guys to make a quick document on how you would actually like to evaluate your system for this project. If you had unlimited time, unlimited resources, not unlimited resources, but essentially if you could do a real evaluation for it, not this usability test we're going to be doing. Usability test is like, does it do the task that we said it could do? Like that's a pretty low bar. Does it do what we said it could do? Not does it do it well? Not does it do it efficiently? Not is it a good experience? Do we get insight from the data? I mean, none of that stuff. It's just like, does it break and catch fire? Okay. So I'm asking you, if you had to do another evaluation, what would you do for your system? That hopefully will bring back like why we do these evaluations and how you can think through the problem. Okay, we're going to throw those, whatever you write up on the Google Drive, we're going to look at a couple of them. It's always nice if you have the chance, but I'm not expecting much. Throw it into a doc, have one, and make sure everyone's names are on the doc that you make. Okay, and then I'll leave this up hopefully. So are you looking at speed, accuracy, conventional equivalence? What are you comparing against? Do you need novice users or expert users? Qualitative, do you want to do an interview? Do you want to do a controlled study? There is no right answer. I want you to think about it. Okay. So I'm going to see if I can make a whole bunch of breakout rooms, and but you guys can start thinking about it while I find how to make breakout rooms. Breakout rooms. I need 7 of us. Let participants choose a room. Great, go. And we'll come back in about 10 minutes. All right, we have we're gonna have a bunch of people showing up in about 7 seconds, but we're gonna go look over some of these. I'm just gonna grab some random set. Steven always gets in trouble because he's the first person to post stuff, and therefore I pick on his work. But it's stuff as well. So I don't really apologize too much on that one. All right, we should have all of these things closing up in a second. All right. There was a link to it that I sent around for the folder. I can send it again. Done. There you go. Yeah, Steven's the only one in there. So fire it up. I'm just going to run over what this is the red light camera group. You had a cool name for it. It's not red light camera group though. What's the name of your group? Isaac or Steven? I got data dudes here. We need someone cool like, blood red. I don't know what the driving red. Red rage. I don't know. So they're looking at red light cameras. And so if you don't want to have a whole bunch of different things. So you're sparing the area to a certain extent, which is fine because you're exploring ideas right now. You want to do a qualitative. Well, you can actually see what surveys, get an idea what people liked, disliked about visualizations. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Although they're going to say, yes, it's great. Why? Because it's yours and they know it's yours. They may not, but it's a good chance that you're gonna get some biased opinions on this. You want to compare it against novice users of the general public? Yeah, I would actually go with the novice users because you're trying to reach as broad of an audience as possible. So how many experts do you need experts? Maybe experts for city of Ottawa or how they're planning or designing their parking, but it's really aimed at casual users, right? So that's who you should be targeting. Great. What metrics care about speed or accuracy? We measure speed to see how long it takes to get comfortable with the system. That's adaptation, not adaptation. Oh, there's a proper term for it. I'm just blanking as like you have two different measures, but really what you want is you sort of need immediate usability. You're not expecting people to necessarily go back to this thing, right? So you do actually have to taste the time, how long it takes them to use the system. You might want to see adoption time, how long it takes, not adoption, but how long it takes them to get up to speed using the system, how long they use the system for might be an interesting thing as well. Compared to tool against the map chart visualizations, compared with brushing, you could test individual features as well on this one. My suggestion would be the big one is you need immediate usability of your system, and you're going to see what their takeaway is. So maybe you want more of a utilitarian approach, but you still need maybe you want to use test their user experience, what they thought about the system. But what's their takeaway in the end? If they do the visualizations, what intersections are they looking at? What conclusions do they make afterwards? Do they have a different set of conclusions compared to uh, what you would expect if you just gave them a whole bunch of numbers? If you just give them your comparison could be, here's a table of all the numbers for all the different places. That's a pretty crappy comparison, but comparison to default, all the various numbers, all the various places, and our system. Maybe you have one without brushing and linking. It's just the red light cameras in the area and the aggregate data, and you're none of the interaction, and compare that. That would also work really quite nicely. All right, see what we got here. Guide groups. This is the all right, mine. That's mine. What the heck? There you go. I moved the wrong one. Sorry. Okay. Okay, it's just meant to show users options for festivals compared to what they can attend in Ottawa. You don't need to be experts. They probably shouldn't be experts, right? They're supposed to be average everyday people in Ottawa. So great. I think it would be useful to compare our system against Google Maps. Absolutely. That's sort of the gold standard right now. finding events by geographical location, or you can compare it to the websites that actually are where you're getting this data from originally, which just has a list of all the different events. If you give someone a book, like say a book of Ottawa tourism book, and compare it to the system, or give them the website for Ottawa tourism against your system, which do they like more, which they use, which is faster for them to make inferences of. Nice. Names, address, and function. Quantitative feedback would be more appreciated. Absolutely. This is a great thing for qualitative feedback because the speed in which you use the system is not as important as will you use that system again? Did you think you found what you were looking for? It's not a time on task. If I'm looking for an Ottawa, something to do in Ottawa, you might want time, but I might just be exploring. There is an entire part of the system which is just like figure out what I want to do on a Friday night or on a, it's a Tuesday. I want to plan out my next couple weeks. I want to go out with my kids to some kind of festival. I don't know what festival. The time at which it takes me is it what I'm looking for? Or am I looking for, do I find the right fit? The right fit will take time. So let me put this in a more a practical, but maybe not practical for you guys. But what I'm obsessing over, we're deciding to buy a new car. Our car is over 10 years old. It's starting to see, and you're on that stage where you change the battery, changes, and suddenly you're paying $5,000, $7,000 for a new car for the fix of the car, when the new car is not going to be that much more. So we're trying to figure out what cars to look at, and I'm looking at various versions of the Honda Accord. Is actually one of the things we're looking at. The number of YouTube videos I've looked at about the Honda Accord right now, or the number of websites I've gone to, the number of comparisons with the Mazda 6, and all this other kind of stuff. I've spent a stupid amount of time in my free time looking at that because I want to have the right decision, not the fast decision. Right? If I'm going to go to a festival, it's not as big of a decision, but I don't want some crappy festival. I want the thing that's going to, because I'm going to have crabby kids in that case. I want to make sure it's right. So time is not what we're looking for necessarily, but time is important, but it's not the be all and end all. How long it takes for the users to find out how long they explain, what can they find what they're looking for? Yeah, that's exactly right. Perfect, Guy. Thank you. Let's see. Tori, we pick on you guys all the time. Local COVID. Let's do local COVID. And then we're going to turn. And here's local COVID. Compare the map, equivalent COVID visualizations. We want various COVID information tests. What test centers, vaccine clinics, what are you comparing it against though? Because Google Maps doesn't necessarily have that information. So where else would you find that information? But with the map, instead asking users to search for data of different several websites, it saves time. If that's what you're looking for, you want to measure time. I think time is actually something very important for this, like time and distance I need to travel. And the reason you want to reduce the distance travel is it saves you time. So if it takes you 20 minutes to use your website and it would be 10 more minutes to drive to that other place, they're going to drive the other 10 minutes. So great point. For metrics, apply definition of terms, define cases for the auto public website. We care more about the accuracy. Holding the available accuracy is going to be critically important. Nice. Including the available services of testing locations and monthly updated case data. Yeah, if they don't trust your data, by the way, that's another metric. User trust in the data is a big deal, especially for COVID tests. If they do not think your data is accurate or up to date, they might use it once. They'll be bad mouthing it. My wife's using, I think it's Get It. There's a local thing for local deliveries in Ottawa. And every time we go onto it, half the things are not there because it's only the restaurants themselves only pop up when they're actually open to deliver food. You can't check out what's available otherwise. There's a whole bunch, and it's not up to date necessarily. I think we've gone to a number of websites or a number of restaurants tried to order and they were closed or they weren't delivering, and we were just like, yep, forget it. Do you trust the data? And you do not require higher level data analysis knowledge. In fact, you've got to make it stupidly easy. You need to make make it so a 70-year-old, grandmother, my mom looking for her COVID test, she can use her system, right? It's got to be slap in the face obvious. Great. That's perfect. Right. And so the question is, what are you comparing it against? Do you want to do it as a control test, or a usability test is fine? Uh, because the time on task is not necessarily the most important thing. Maybe you give them your system and see what they do wrong. The number of errors they make when using your system compared to the number of errors they make when using some other system. Maybe you want it more qualitative just to make sure that they feel like it's more effective as well. There's there's no right answer. That's the point. It was these are all really well done, everyone. Thank you. Oh, we're over time. So what I'm going to do, we're going to take a little break. Next time around, I might do a very, 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 very brief overview of the different ways of evaluating, but we're going to stop evaluation. We're going to jump over to the finishing off node link diagrams, and then we're going to look at like scientific visualizations, and I think we have some timeline visualization stuff as well. When we come back, I'm just going to be sitting around helping you guys out if you have any problems about your project, and seeing if I can help you in any way, shape, or form to make sure you're on task and see how these sprints are going. Okay, so that's what the lab is. So with that said, I'm going to take my leave. We're going to take a little break, and when we come back, I'm just here to help out if I can. Thanks, everyone. Stop the recording.